When I do things, I like to just get into them, right? I decided that I was going to write the book. And at Christmas, I was already thinking about what the different themes were that were going to be in the book. And in January 22, I started writing it. The interviews happened between February and March. I think I did start with emotional capability as the first chapter. That was for me the biggest subject. It was the one that I wanted answers to when I started the coaching course. It's probably my biggest and deepest area of self-development. Through so much of my life, I've taken a very intellectual approach. And I guess I was kind of scared to open up some of that emotional stuff. It feels tough to work on the emotional stuff because you're really chiseling away at things that you believe in and things that you feel are important and going, is that true? Or is that holding you back? And do I need to change it in some way? As I started doing the interviews with these 14 people who so generously came forward, that was the thing I discovered over and over again. Whether they'd chosen to do coaching because it felt there were things that they needed to work on, which was a message I think I got from Liz, one of my interviewees, that she was drawn to coaching because she felt that there was lots to work on in terms of her own personal development, and that going through the coaching training and becoming a coach would help her to tackle those things for herself and be able to do more for her clients. I think in my case, going intellectually, I think a coaching qualification would be a really good idea. Oh my God, and there's all this stuff that I now need to work on or that I'm finding myself working on. So I think it's chicken and egg. But yeah, many of the people that I interviewed shared stuff very generously and vulnerably, shared stuff, the tough stuff that they've had to work on and that they've worked on, and how that's helped them and how that's given them so much more that they can then offer to their clients. There were two Sarahs that I interviewed, and Sarah T and Nikki talked about how coaching comes into our parenting and our experience of parenting comes into our coaching. And I've got a whole chapter on interactions with family and friends. Amy, before she became a coach, came across something called the listening partnerships, which is a reciprocal 10 minutes either way opportunity to just listen to someone else and have them listen to you, which is a fantastic skill to bring into coaching. But she discovered that as a parent, as a really powerful resource to support her in her parenting, and then came to coaching. Diane, I really feel, has magic within her. When I interviewed her, it was still quite early on in our work together as peer coaches. So things she was sharing with me, I was hearing for the first time. And she shared that what influences her learning and how she goes about her life are her values. And as she shared those values with me, I was sitting there kind of thinking, oh my God, my values. I've got values. I've thought about my values. I've done the work with the barefoot cards to identify which ones are my values. And they still feel true, but I haven't been referencing them. I haven't been paying attention to them. And so I revisited them as a result of this conversation with Diane and realised that there was a really strong connection with many of the themes that had emerged in my book, and that they were really shaping the way I am living my life. So for Becca, that clash between the pandemic, completing the coaching course, wanting to start a new business, having a child, and moving house, woof, that was all happening at once. So for her, it was basically, as she says in the interview, she'd had anxiety for a while anyway, but that tipped things over and she went into burnout and she needed help and she got help. So, talk about having to deal with all of that stuff and how, again, the tough stuff that I mentioned earlier, the tough stuff that we have to mention and how that shapes us. Jacqueline talked about some other types of anxiety and challenges, a sense of not feeling equal to other people, tough stuff that she's had to work with in terms of her relationship with her mum, and having to more or less sort of rewire herself, recreate herself. And she uses the word self-restoration for her. That self-restoration has been such a key concept in her life, and again is something that she can bring into her coaching. So again, really powerful examples of the tough personal stuff that we go through and how that shapes us as individuals and as coaches, and in terms of what we can bring to our clients. Patrick, like the other coaches, shared some very deep stuff that he's worked through in life. And one of the most recent was in 2019, his mum dying, basically, being in her final time, and him travelling over to New Zealand to be with her. And he thought it would just be 3 weeks, and it turned into 6.5 months. And it was extremely difficult to be there with her whilst her health was gradually deteriorating, to be that close to someone in that condition. And he shared this beautiful sentence that when his mum was worrying about him having to go through this with her, and him saying, I shared my first breath with you, and you're sharing your last breath with mine, or vice versa. You shared my first breath with me, and I'm sharing your last breath with you. And that was just so, yeah, touching. Interviewing Emily was really, really fascinating. I got a quite different perspective from her than I had from anyone else. She referred back to her childhood and her mother and father, and how between them, and it wasn't necessarily mother one, father the other, but between them, they embodied the masculine, feminine aspects of life, which she described as nurturing and action, nurturing feminine and action masculine. And so her coaching is really about that balance between the feminine and masculine within us all. And it felt really spiritual in how she was describing it. She's another person who reads massively. And so when we were talking, she was referring to philosophy, neuroscience, psychology, maybe even metaphysics, and how it's all relevant and how it all interweaves. She was probably the one who brought the most spirituality into our conversations, and it was absolutely fascinating. Yeah. Hazel reads masses, mostly as audiobooks. And in fact, I'm going to produce a version of this book as an audiobook for Hazel and other coaches who like to listen to books rather than read them. And Hazel, again, really strong values of honesty and treating each of our clients with dignity. And I believe that comes through in all of her interactions, certainly with me individually, and I believe it comes through in her interactions with her clients. Tim, for me, is deeply thoughtful. Things really, really matter. Things are really important. So I really value his input and his reflections. And both him and Nikki, I think, very generously reviewed my emotional capability chapter and reminded me and challenged me to make sure that my emotional voice came through it, not just my intellectual side. And Tim was really influenced by the transactional analysis component of our training, and uses that a lot in his coaching. And I think it may have been through talking with him that I was just reminded of how powerful that tool is. And that comes a lot into my coaching too now. And both he and Nikki kind of reflected about what brings us to coaching and what place is there for our ego versus a really altruistic approach and a focus on the client and how we can support them. And that tips over again into that interface between psychology and coaching, counseling and coaching, which Nikki is really intrigued about exploring. So yeah, those two have been really supportive in what I'm doing with this book, as well as also generously acting as amongst my very first interviewees. Another very early interviewee that I really should mention is Kerry, because Kerry has been one of my peer coaches right from the start as well. Kerry also did the barefoot course with me. And the topic that she explored in the interview was around boundaries, how we manage our boundaries. And so many coaches are either thinking about or have started to work for themselves, and typically will do that from home. And so there they are at home with whoever else is in the family, coming in and out of the house. And if you're early on in your coaching practice and the money's not coming in, there could be that conflict between, oh, well, I'm not actually earning money, so I'm not really working. So therefore, I need to be more available for other people, as opposed to, no, this is something serious that I want to get started, that I want to focus on. And of course, the pandemic, was still rolling on. A lot of people working from home, a lot of the clients that we work with working from home. So this question of boundaries, because you didn't have the physical boundary, if you don't have the physical boundary that you're used to with commuting to work and working elsewhere, makes that so much more difficult. And so for Kerry, the message from the interview from her was that if you can find a way to work through these things that enable you to find peace within yourself as a result, then you can bring that more peaceful person to your work with your clients. About 2 summers ago now, I decided to take the Do It profiler to find out whether I was neurodivergent. And neurodivergence refers to the so-called neurominorities. About somewhere between 15 to 20% of us are autistic, have ADHD or dyslexia. I am the parent of an autistic young adult who is diagnosed as autistic and believes they have ADHD. The belief is that it runs in families, it's hereditary. And they have always been telling me, Mum, you've got autistic traits as well, So I took the profiler, daftly took it just before settling into a training course that morning. So the results popped up straight away saying, you have some autistic characteristics. And it just completely threw me. It was like, oh my God, there is so much stigma associated with neurodivergence. And I went straight there. Oh, I'm autistic. Oh, that means that. And then, of course, I realized I'm just as capable as I always was. All the ways I've learned to be still hold true. And I'm absolutely fine. I think I had already started working with Genius Within. They support people who are neurodivergent. And it was like, yes, now I can really feel like I have credibility, that I can understand something of what my coaching clients are experiencing, because I know now that the fact that I felt different as a child is what a lot of other people experience who are neurodivergent. And that now makes sense. And I am whole and capable, just as they are whole and capable. And that was a sort of discussion I had with Tanya, who is autistic. Her daughter's autistic, and she also discovered late in life. So the both of us, we bring that understanding in our work with our clients, and we don't have to share that we're autistic, but they will know that from our biographies. We don't need to talk about it unless they wish us to, but it's that matching of vulnerability and creating psychological safety on either side of the coaching helix. But the other thing I want to say is, of course, that being a parent of someone who's autistic and everything that they've experienced in life, and hearing how that plays out in the workplace, both for individuals and in the dynamics between their managers and themselves is one of the things that really touched my heart in terms of wanting to work with people and help them to realize that they do have choice. They have choice about where they work, what work they do, and how they show up at work. They don't have to mask and be other than their true authentic selves, but it's how to do that and how to feel comfortable doing that in a world that often doesn't recognize and value that so-called difference that we have. Conducting the interviews, I don't think changed the themes that I wanted to explore in the book. They did all sorts of things. In some cases, they resonated beautifully with the themes that I'd chosen. And in other cases, they were like, oh, here's some stuff like the values of Diane that I haven't really thought about yet. It was just beautifully affirming to hear these stories. And the interviews both surfaced things that I hadn't thought about, echoed things that I was thinking about. And also, it was such a privilege of having that space with these 14 people, getting yet another proof of how we are whole, we are all capable, and we have that beauty and brilliance within ourselves that's just waiting to be surfaced.